This can't be right. Look at these results.
What does it mean? Tell me everything.
I'm not sure, but we need to figure this out now.
The sound of paper tearing was sharp and violent, like a blade ripping through something alive. It echoed through the glass and marble penthouse, cutting deeper than any shouted insult ever could. She stood frozen, her fingers still curled in the air where the ultrasound photo had been only seconds before. Tiny black and white fragments fluttered down slowly, landing near her shoes like the remains of a dream that had just been executed without trial. This baby is not mine. His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that came from certainty, cold, absolute, unyielding. Not a crack of doubt. Not a flicker of fear. She could not breathe. The city skyline behind him blurred into streaks of light as her vision filled with tears she hadn't yet earned permission to release. Her mind struggled to catch up with what had just happened. Moments ago, she had walked into this penthouse clutching hope, rehearsing smiles, imagining surprise and maybe even laughter. Now she stood accused, judged, and sentenced in the same breath. "What are you saying?" she whispered, though she already knew. The answer had been delivered with the sound of tearing paper. He turned his back on her and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind him like a man addressing a boardroom, not a woman carrying his child. The city below sparkled indifferently, unaware that a life had just been shattered in silence. "I had cancer when I was 23, he said, his tone clinical, detached. "Testicular cancer. The treatment saved my life. It also destroyed any chance I had of having children. I've known for over a decade that I'm infertile. Completely." Each word landed like a verdict. She instinctively pressed a hand to her stomach, as if shielding the tiny heartbeat growing inside her from the cruelty in the room. "That's not possible," she said softly. "I would never. James, you're the only man I've been with. The only one. I love you." He turned then. And the look in his eyes was worse than anger. It was contempt. "You knew exactly who I was when you applied to work here," he said. "My wealth. My influence. My resources. You saw an opportunity." "No," she said, the word breaking apart as it left her mouth. "I saw you. I saw the man who stayed up until 4 in the morning helping me fix a broken presentation. The man who brought me coffee and listened when I talked about my life. I didn't want your money. I wanted you." "You wanted security," he replied. "And now you want child support. A guaranteed future. How much did the real father pay you to pass this child off as mine?" The accusation was so cruel, so calculated, that it stole her voice entirely. Tears spilled freely now, hot and unstoppable, sliding down her cheeks as she shook her head in disbelief. "This can't be happening," she said. "You know me." "I thought I did," he replied. "I was wrong." He gestured toward the door without even looking at her. "Leave. If you contact me again, if you come near my office or anyone connected to me, I will make your life very difficult. I have the means to do so." Her knees felt weak, but she forced herself to stand straight. She refused to beg. Refused to collapse in front of him. "The baby," she said, her voice cracking. "Our baby." "There is no baby of mine," he said flatly. "There is only your lie." She bent down slowly, gathering the torn pieces of the ultrasound from the marble floor. Each fragment cut into her fingers like glass. She slipped them into her purse not because they could be fixed, but because they were proof that this moment had been real. Without another word, she turned and walked out. 3 hours earlier, she had been sitting in a quiet clinic room, heart pounding as the doctor smiled gently at her. "Congratulations," the doctor had said. "You're 10 weeks pregnant. Everything looks healthy. The heartbeat is strong." She had stared at the screen in disbelief, watching the tiny flicker of life that changed everything. Fear came first, then wonder, then hope. She thought of him immediately, how this would alter their secret relationship, how maybe this unexpected life could bring honesty, openness, and a future they hadn't planned but might grow into. She had no idea how wrong she was. She met him on her first day at the company, fresh out of a failed startup and desperate for stability. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. She never planned to fall for her boss. Yet he was nothing like the ruthless executive she'd imagined. He remembered names, asked about families, worked harder than anyone else in the building. Their connection formed during a crisis. A major client presentation had collapsed hours before delivery. She stayed late trying to fix it, fingers aching, eyes burning. Near midnight, he appeared in her doorway. "You're still here?" he said, surprised. "I can't let this fail," she replied. He rolled up his sleeves and sat beside her. "Then let's fix it." They worked through the night, talking between data charts and caffeine refills. He told her about surviving cancer, about learning how fragile everything was. She told him about growing up with nothing, about wanting to matter. Somewhere between exhaustion and dawn, something shifted. "You're remarkable," he told her quietly. "Don't forget that." They kept things secret after that. Carefully. Professionally. He never showed favoritism. If anything, he pushed her harder. And she loved him for that, loved the way he believed in her competence more than her devotion. They never talked about children. She assumed there would be time. Now she sat on a subway train headed back to her tiny apartment, clutching her purse like it contained her last remaining piece of dignity. The torn ultrasound pressed against her hip, a reminder that joy and devastation could exist within the same day. Her phone buzzed. A message from a lawyer, threatening legal action if she pursued paternity claims. She typed back only once. "I want nothing from him. Not his money. Not his name. But the truth is the truth." Then she blocked the number. That night, alone in her apartment, she cried until her chest ached and her eyes burned. She cried for the man she loved. For the future that died on a marble floor. For the child who would grow up without a father because that father refused to believe in miracles. Eventually the tears stopped. She placed a hand over her stomach and whispered into the quiet room, "It's just you and me now. But that will be enough. I promise." And she meant it. 3 months later, the elevator doors closed softly behind her, sealing her inside with the faint hum of machinery and the steady rhythm of her own breathing. She rested one hand on her stomach, now unmistakably round beneath her loose dress, and stared at her reflection in the mirrored wall. The woman looking back at her seemed older somehow, stronger in posture, heavier in the eyes. She barely recognized herself, yet she trusted this version more than the one who had once walked into a penthouse believing love alone could protect her. The transfer request had been approved without explanation. No questions. No awkward meetings. Human Resources had simply nodded and reassigned her to a department 5 floors below the executive offices. She was grateful for the quiet efficiency of it. Distance was the only mercy left to her. Her new supervisor was a woman named Patricia Chin, brilliant, direct, and unfailingly observant. On her first day in the analytics department, Patricia glanced once at her belly and once at her face, then said nothing at all. Instead, she handed her a thick project folder and said, "We value people who show up even when it's hard. If you need flexibility, ask. If you need respect, demand it." Those words lodged deep in her chest. Work became refuge. Numbers didn't lie. Data didn't accuse. Campaign results rose and fell based on effort, insight, and execution, things she could control. She stayed late when her body allowed it, drank ginger tea for the nausea, and learned to breathe through the exhaustion. The days passed more quickly than the nights. The nights were harder. At home, the silence pressed in. The baby kicked more now, gentle reminders that she wasn't alone, even when loneliness wrapped itself around her like a second skin. She spoke aloud sometimes, narrating her day, whispering hopes and promises. She chose a name and said it often, tasting the future on her tongue. Her best friend moved in for a while. Rachel brought noise and laughter and groceries and a fierce kind of loyalty that bordered on fury. She listened once, then never asked again. When rage bubbled up, Rachel carried it for her. When fear crept in, Rachel chased it away with practical plans and medical referrals and quiet strength. Every doctor's appointment ended the same way: reassurance, steady heartbeats, healthy growth. Each confirmation felt like a small victory against the narrative that had tried to erase her. At the office, she learned how to avoid him without seeming to. She timed her breaks, took alternate stairwells, memorized the sound of his footsteps from a distance. Sometimes she caught glimpses, his reflection in glass, his voice echoing down a corridor, and each time her chest tightened before she reminded herself to keep walking. She never spoke his name. Across the city, inside that same penthouse, the man who had torn up the ultrasound stood alone more often than he cared to admit. The rooms were immaculate, untouched, silent. He worked longer hours now, driving himself with an intensity that worried his executive team. Deals closed. Products launched. Applause followed him everywhere, yet none of it quieted the restlessness gnawing at him. He replayed that night more times than he could count. Not the accusation, he clung to that certainty like armor, but the look on her face. The way her hands shook. The way she bent down to pick up the torn pieces instead of screaming. His sister noticed the change immediately when she flew in for Thanksgiving. She studied him over dinner, watching him push food around his plate without eating. "You look terrible," she said flatly. "I'm busy," he replied. "You're unraveling," she corrected. "Tell me what you did." He told her everything. The pregnancy. The accusation. The certainty. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she set down her fork and leaned forward. "When was the last time you actually confirmed your infertility?" she asked. He frowned. "That's irrelevant." "It's not," she said calmly. "You were told something over a decade ago. Medicine changes. Bodies change." "It was permanent," he insisted. "Unlikely doesn't mean impossible," she replied. "You built an empire betting on exceptions. Why wouldn't biology have one too?" The question unsettled him more than he cared to admit. After she left, the thought followed him everywhere. Into meetings. Into sleepless nights. Into the quiet moments when certainty began to feel suspiciously like fear. Weeks later, he sat in a sterile clinic room, staring at the floor as tests were run. Time stretched. His confidence thinned. When the doctor finally spoke, the words landed softly but irreversibly. "Your fertility has partially recovered," the doctor said. "Natural conception would be difficult, but possible." The room tilted. He drove aimlessly for nearly an hour afterward, gripping the steering wheel as realization crashed over him in waves. The accusation. The threats. The certainty he'd used as a weapon. Each memory sharpened into regret. He tried to call her. Blocked. Text. Blocked. Email. Returned. For the first time in his life, his influence meant nothing. At work, he went to Patricia's office, not as a CEO but as a man stripped of authority. He asked about her health. About the baby. Patricia answered only what was necessary, her disapproval unhidden. "Ask her if she'll meet me," he said quietly. "Once." The answer came back the next day. "No." He sat alone in his office afterward, staring at the city through the same glass walls that had once framed his certainty. He had torn up proof without waiting for truth. And now truth had found him anyway, too late to undo the damage. But consequences, he was learning, didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrived in silence. The winter air was sharp the morning everything changed again. She stood at the bus stop, scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, one hand braced against the small of her back as a slow ache traveled through her hips. The baby shifted, pressing insistently, reminding her that time was no longer a distant concept. It was moving fast, whether she was ready or not. She had learned how to live inside that urgency. Her days were measured now in milestones. Weeks remaining, appointments scheduled, deadlines met before maternity leave. Each task completed felt like armor being fastened piece by piece. She had stopped waiting for apologies. Stopped expecting rescue. Survival had taught her efficiency. At work, her performance spoke louder than her silence ever could. Campaign models she built outperformed projections. Forecasts she corrected saved the company millions. Patricia noticed. So did others. Her name began circulating in rooms she had never been invited into before. Not because of who she knew, but because of what she delivered. One afternoon, during a quarterly review meeting, a senior executive interrupted a discussion and asked, "Who built this model?" Patricia gestured toward her. She did. There was a pause. Eyes shifted. Recognition flickered. She kept her gaze steady, her expression neutral. Praise felt strange now, almost intrusive, but she accepted it with quiet professionalism. Respect, she had learned, wasn't always announced. Sometimes it arrived late and whispered. Meanwhile, across the building, he watched her from a distance he had earned. He saw the way people listened when she spoke, the way she carried herself. No bitterness, no spectacle, only competence sharpened by resilience. The woman he had dismissed as opportunistic had become undeniable. Guilt settled in his chest like a permanent weight. He made changes quietly. The lawyer was dismissed. The legal threats rescinded. Policies rewritten. He initiated anonymous donations to maternal health clinics, scholarships for single mothers, programs he never attached his name to. None of it felt like enough. He wanted forgiveness. But forgiveness, he was learning, was not something power could negotiate. Then the call came. She was in a meeting when Patricia stepped into the room, her expression unreadable. "You need to come with me." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Hours blurred into effort and pain and breath. Rachel never left her side. When the baby finally cried, the sound cut through everything, sharp, fierce, alive. She wept openly then, clutching her child to her chest, overwhelmed by the weight and wonder of it. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not betrayal. Not regret. Not the man who had turned away. Across town, he received the notification through channels he had no right to access anymore. A birth announcement in the internal system. Automated, impersonal. A daughter. The word settled into him with devastating clarity. He did not rush to the hospital. He did not demand entry. For once he waited. Days later she received a letter. Handwritten. No legal language. No excuses. I was wrong, it began. About everything that mattered. She read it once. Then again. He wrote about fear. About certainty mistaken for truth. About how easily power had blinded him. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked only for the chance to be accountable. She folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Weeks passed. Life reshaped itself around feedings and sleepless nights. Her daughter's presence filled the apartment with a kind of joy that didn't ask permission. Rachel helped when she could. Patricia sent flowers without a note. Then one quiet afternoon she agreed to meet him, on her terms. The cafe was small, neutral, public. He stood when she arrived, then stopped himself, unsure of protocol. He looked older. Smaller somehow. She sat across from him, her daughter sleeping against her chest. He did not reach for the baby. I don't expect anything, he said. I only wanted to say this in person. I was wrong. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure my mistake doesn't define hers. She studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy but honest. Respect, she said finally, is not an apology. It's a pattern. He nodded. Then let me prove it. She stood, adjusting the baby's blanket, and met his eyes one last time. We'll see, she said. And for the first time since the night in the penthouse, the future did not feel broken. The months that followed did not unfold like a movie redemption arc. There were no grand gestures, no public confessions, no dramatic reunions framed by swelling music. Instead there was time, slow, deliberate, and unforgiving. Time that tested intentions the way fire tests steel. She returned to work on a phased schedule, her daughter settled with a trusted caregiver recommended by Rachel. The first day back she paused in the lobby longer than necessary, steadying her breath. Motherhood had sharpened her senses. Every sound felt louder. Every decision heavier. She reminded herself that she belonged here, not because of anyone else but because she had earned it. Patricia met her with a quiet smile and a revised role description. Expanded responsibilities. A title change. A clear path forward. No mention of accommodations beyond what was practical. No pity. Only respect. He stayed away. Not because he didn't want to be near her, but because he understood, finally, that restraint was a form of accountability. He made sure his calendar did not overlap with hers. He delegated meetings. He let her work be evaluated by others, praised by others. When her projects succeeded, he celebrated privately and silently. People noticed the shift in him too. He listened more. Interrupted less. Asked questions he once thought beneath him. When a junior analyst challenged an assumption in a meeting, he thanked them instead of correcting them. When an assistant took parental leave, he insisted the promotion timeline wait. Power, he was learning, could either crush or create space. One afternoon, an internal crisis erupted. A high-profile client accused the company of misleading analytics, an allegation that threatened legal action and public backlash. Panic rippled through leadership. Emergency meetings were called. Old instincts rose to the surface. He stopped them. Bring her in, he said. There was hesitation. History. Optics. She built the framework, he added. She understands it better than anyone. She entered the room composed, carrying a tablet and a calm that steadied everyone else. She listened. She asked precise questions. She traced the error, not a deception but a misinterpretation, back to a third-party integration. She proposed a correction, a transparent disclosure, and a client-facing explanation that protected both truth and trust. The room exhaled. When it was over, the client stayed. The lawsuit evaporated. The company's reputation strengthened. Applause followed, but she accepted it the same way she accepted everything now, without shrinking, without reaching. After the meeting he waited. When the room emptied he spoke only once. Thank you, he said. Not as a boss. Not as a man seeking absolution. Just as someone acknowledging competence. She nodded. Nothing more. At home that evening she watched her daughter sleep, tiny chest rising and falling, fingers curled around nothing and everything. She thought about the world her child would grow into. About the example she wanted to set, not of bitterness but of boundaries. Not of forgiveness given freely, but of dignity protected fiercely. The next letter arrived weeks later. This one was brief. I've set up a trust, it read. No conditions. No publicity. It's for her education and care. Managed independently. If you decline, I'll respect that. If you accept, I'll never use it as leverage. She considered it for a long time. Then she accepted, on paper with legal clarity, with her autonomy intact. Not as surrender. As provision. As protection. When he received her response, he closed his eyes and let the relief pass without celebration. This was not a victory. It was a responsibility. Their interactions remained minimal, professional, restrained. But something fundamental had shifted. Not reconciliation, recognition. Not romance, respect. And in that space, something unexpected grew: peace. The auditorium was filled to capacity, the soft murmur of voices echoing beneath the high ceiling as lights dimmed and the stage came into focus. The annual Leadership Summit had grown into one of the most anticipated events in the industry, a place where influence was measured not just by profit but by principle. She stood just beyond the curtain, her daughter asleep against her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight that grounded her more than any title ever could. Her name was printed in the program beneath a new heading: Keynote Speaker. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause rose instinctively. She waited for it to settle before speaking, her voice steady, unhurried. "I want to talk about certainty," she began. "How dangerous it can be. How often we mistake it for truth." The room listened. She spoke of power, how it magnifies character, how it can blind even the most intelligent people. She spoke of resilience without revealing wounds. Of rebuilding without naming destruction. Of choosing dignity when humiliation would have been easier. Some in the audience knew the story. Many did not. It didn't matter. What mattered was the lesson. In the front row, he sat quietly, hands folded, no entourage, no need for acknowledgement. He listened as if every word was addressed directly to him. When she spoke about accountability, he did not look away. When she spoke about respect, he nodded once. Afterward, people lined up to thank her, to ask questions, to tell her how her words resonated. She accepted it all with grace, then slipped away before the crowd could turn her into a symbol instead of a person. Backstage, he waited, not to intrude but to witness. She approached him when she was ready. "Our daughter is walking," she said casually. "Stubborn already." A smile touched his face. "I believe that." They stood there for a moment, two people forever changed by one night of certainty and its consequences. "I won't erase what happened," she said. "But I won't let it define her." "I wouldn't ask you to," he replied. "You taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn." She nodded, then turned to leave. Years later, her daughter would grow up knowing a story told without bitterness. A story about mistakes owned, not denied. About strength that didn't shout. About justice that arrived not through revenge but through truth. And he would live the rest of his life differently, not haunted but humbled. Using power carefully. Listening longer. Judging less. Because karma had done its work. Not by destroying him, but by teaching him.